Good. I'm excited to talk to you. My name is Alain Sylvain. I'm the founder and CEO of Sylvain Labs. I'm an egomaniac. I named the company after me. We have an office in New York, and we have a small office here in Amsterdam, and we have an office in Richmond, Virginia. We work with a bunch of companies to help them think about the future of their product experiences, the future of their brands. We help them develop new product ideas, new brand ideas, and we're lucky to do that across a number of industries, including a lot of work in technology. Recently, just to give you an example, we worked with Google in the development of their voice assistant. So thinking a little bit about what the voice assistant actually needs to do to provide value for you. What are the values of that voice system? How do you need to interact with the voice system to really get something back from it? And that, of course, resulted in the integration into Pixel and Google Home, just to give you a sense of what I do. And at the heart of what we do is this notion of time. Time is the most paramount and most influential concept in our life, and we don't take credit, we don't think about it. We don't think about the difference between moments. We don't think about how time goes by. But time is absolutely the most relevant concept, I think, for a conference like this. It is, without a doubt, the most tormenting and tortured idea for human beings. We think about time all the time. We think about our own mortality all the time. We think about dreams. We think about memories. We have biological clocks, and we have the rotations of the sun. Everything is about time, and we don't acknowledge that enough. In fact, we work so hard to hack time. We're obsessed with making the most of our time, making sure there's no idle time. Am I getting shit done? Am I moving fast? This is my calendar, and I stress about it all the time. And of course, we're consumed with the notion of mortality. We're consumed with this idea of being young and going back in time and being a better version of myself. And we've romanticized the past. We've taken leaps forward, we've taken leaps back. We think constantly about nostalgic ideas that make us feel more comfortable deep down. And we fantasize, we create these ridiculous fantasies about what the future is through science fiction. We romanticize the future. Nothing beats time. Time is fundamental to everything we do. It's our greatest asset in life, in our personal life, in our work life. And we shouldn't forget it, because nothing beats time at all, unless you're Pharrell, who somehow, I don't know what my man is doing, he looks the same for the past 25 years, or 50, it's kind of ridiculous, but nothing beats time. And just as important is this notion of timing. It's like the perfect synchronicity, the perfect storm of different ideas meeting. It's kind of in the city where I live, in New York. You know, the train comes, and it's just the perfect moment. I actually met my wife on the train. It's just a random set of experiences that resulted in that sort of experience. Time is fundamental. And when you think about the work we do, we think about the shit that we do every day, it's kind of the most important thing. There was a study done, you can't read the source there, and I forgot what it was, but the question asked was, what is the single best reason for an idea's success? Thousands of entrepreneurs were asked that question, what's the single best reason for success? And 42% said timing. Timing, by far, the most important thing. It doesn't matter what the idea is. It doesn't matter whether it's new, if you haven't seen it before. It doesn't matter if it's an innovative technology or even if you pulled it off correctly. It's about timing. Did it land at the absolute optimal time? And that's what we're obsessed with at my company. That's what we think about all the time. And that's why we say timing is more important than ingenuity. We've romanticized this idea about new, about being cool. Have you heard about this cool thing where you can fly and do this thing and you feel the haptics and technology and blah, blah? It's ridiculous, because what really matters is whether it fits the moment. Otherwise, it's just a novelty. Otherwise, the work we do is just sort of a masturbatory exercise. And I think about the tent next door, that amazing tent with these amazing technologies and these amazing entrepreneurs, and I was really impressed. But as you walk through it, I can't help but asking the question, which one of these ideas is landing the Optimus Time? Or is it just a sort of a science fair with just really interesting ideas and interesting innovations that will one day meet its time? But let me tell you a little bit more. Let me talk a little bit more about this notion that we call Optimus Time. It's not brain surgery. It's not super sophisticated, but it's basically the idea that there's a moment when things are right. The consumer appetite, the user appetite, the culture, the category, everything is lined up to really result in the right idea. This is the media and marketing stage. So to talk a little bit about marketing, let's look back. Brands used to communicate this way. They would paint these really aspirational, fantastical stories about, you could be this really cool white dude on a horse. Well, a lot of you are white dudes. This to me would have been, that's what they would say to me. And Cindy Crawford was this amazingly beautiful woman that so people thought. It was all these very lofty, profound ideas that meant to take you somewhere else. And the role of the brand in the 80s and the 90s was to put forth these really far-reaching ideas that you needed to achieve. And of course, they did it with these really profound platitudes that they called taglines. Just do it. Think different. Go further. These call to actions that you could be more. You could do it. And people wanted that from brands. But if you look at now, and you think about how brands are communicating today, some of the more interesting brands that we talk about here in the United States, or there in the United States, are these brands, Warby Parker, Oscar, and Casper. These are brands that have approached branding and marketing and promotion in a completely different way. They're not putting forth these lofty aspirations that you need to achieve. They're talking to you as peers, and they're being super transparent and super straightforward about who they are and how they communicate. If you look at their design, they use a lot of minimal design. And of course, even their names are actual people's names, so you can personify them. They're not these abstract promises that people are meant to aspire to. So even in brands, the point is that there's an Optimus Time for how to talk to people. In the 80s, the Optimus Time was about lofty, aspirational promises. And today, I think we're coming to a much more transparent, approachable, peer-to-peer way of speaking to consumers. But let's think about products. If you look at music streaming over the past 15 or 20 years, it really tipped last year, where 51% of music consumption actually occurred on a streaming platform. And of course, streaming has existed for just as long. Streaming has existed for 20 years. The ability to stream music has existed in many different platforms, whether it's Slacker. The second incarnation of Napster was entirely about streaming. Deezer. And of course, iTunes did a lot to habituate people into this idea of digital music. But something happened, though. Something happened when Spotify launched in 2008 and in the US in 2011. They hit an Optimus Time. Something happened where people were open to the idea of streaming music. Prior to that, they needed to hoard the music. The idea was I needed to own as much music as I possibly can. And it took a shift for people to really get into this behavior of streaming. Spotify hit that time at the right moment. It's not that they were ingenious. It's not that they were incredible engineers, which they are. They're a client of Sylvain Labs, so they're great. But they're really more so hit the moment at the perfect time. And if you think about product development, I don't know if you guys, is this in Europe, Silk? Okay, Silk is a soy milk. It's kind of the biggest soy milk in the United States. And the story of that is really quite interesting because the extract of soybeans actually existed for decades. They called it soy juice, and they were packaged in a lot of different ways, and it really didn't take hold. It was invented in the 60s, didn't take hold until the 90s. The Optimus Time of the 90s, there was a health craze. People were doing Atkins diets. People were thinking about their lifestyle differently. People increasingly were lactose intolerant. This idea of a dairy substitute was new. And so soy milk launched, and they did something genius. They named it soy milk. They didn't name it soy juice, they named it soy milk. They put it in the refrigerated dairy aisle. Soy milk doesn't need to be refrigerated. But somehow, by putting it in that context, it clicked in consumers' minds that this was the Optimus Time. This was the right moment for this sort of behavior. And it took off and exploded. And I love to talk about Optimus Time in the context of pop culture. The Apprentice was a huge show in the United States in 2003 to 2005, and maybe a little bit later. And of course, it was here in Europe as well. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I don't think that's a coincidence, because in the early 2000s, we idolized these super egomaniacal CEOs, Steve Jobs and Sergey, and they were put on a pedestal, these like cutthroat, do everything CEOs. And that's the reason The Apprentice was a big deal, the idea that you can learn from one of these insane masterminds. And that's why The Apprentice worked at that time. And what was interesting, after the recession, The Apprentice waned. because no one liked the dick CEO anymore. People really didn't sympathize with that idea anymore. And what you saw were new sort of reality TV shows that celebrated this idea of corporate contrition. And Undercover Boss is a great example. It's a show where the CEO disguises herself to be one of the people on the factory line just to truly empathize with what it's like to do work in the day-to-day. And that was a reflection of that Optimus Time. And then, of course, now you see Shark Tank, the third incarnation of these business-driven reality TV shows that's all about the entrepreneur. It's all about the hero entrepreneur. And that's the reason Shark Tank, which of course is based on Dragon's Den in the UK, is so successful. Because we went from idolizing the corporate CEO, the maniacal super do-anything person, to the entrepreneur who's getting things done day to day. So the point is to pay attention to what these moments are, because it's not that these shows are in themselves inherently fantastic. It's that they are in themselves inherently timed perfectly for what people really want in the moment. And then there's this fucker. No clapping. No clapping. No, I'm just kidding. No, hey, you can clap if you want. But Donald Trump absolutely seized an Optimus Time, so to speak, in the United States. There was something about that perfect storm that just resulted in that moment. And of course, populism throughout the world and throughout Europe and Brexit and so on. And it's very easy for me to talk about Optimus Time because hindsight is 20/20. You know, you look back, it's very easy to say, well, that was the Optimus Time. But I want to talk a little bit about how we do our work and thinking about that. Because no one saw this thing coming. No one saw it happening at all. And then everyone's mind was blown when it happened. So I want to talk a little bit about that phenomenon. So Optimus Time is the perfect symmetry of amazing factors, these profound sort of ideas and factors, whether it's politics and culture, geography, the economic climate, the competitive landscape. It's really all these things coming together in the most perfect way. And a good example of that is Grumpy Cat, which of course is an amazing, I don't know why Grumpy Cat just took hold in that particular moment, but something just completely clicked for users and for that visual and for that behavior and the way it evolved that people needed. People needed it really bad at that time. And I'm not sure why, because you know what? It's not an original concept, this idea of a really sour cat. That's not an idea. There's this American photographer named Harry Fries who in 1906 did the same thing. He did the same thing. He found the humor of this scenario of a cat with a very kind of somber face in these ridiculous situations. The dude was prolific in 1906. I mean, he did a lot of these. He did all sorts of random cat images in really bizarre scenarios. So the point is to second guess ourselves and not to be consumed with the fetish of originality, this idea of I have to be original and that original ideas are what's going to make the difference for me tomorrow. It's not only ingenuity, it's also about thinking about what the appetite is. And this is how we do it. We think about the past, we think about the present, and we think about the future. When it comes to the past, and this is the easy one, is to look back. What can we learn? You know, can we look at the cat in 1906 and bring it back to life in a new and fresh way? Hollywood has done this really well with bringing back the 80s. You know, the 80s are cool. This is a very interesting, like, 30-year cycle, if you notice, of culture, in pop culture, going back and bringing things from 30 or so, 20 to 30 years ago. Right now, we're in the middle of a 90s hip-hop sort of a retrospect in pop culture now. And I think that's because that sort of time needs to go by for people to kind of reconsume the stuff that we did before. And some artists are based entirely on that phenomenon, entirely on the phenomenon of deriving music from the past and packaging it in a slightly different way. And Bruno Mars is an amazing artist, an amazing performer. But if you listen to his music and connect it to the past, you actually notice there's nothing really original about that music. There's this song, right? We all know the song. It's got the bass line and the guitars and the vocals. But if you study music and music history, you notice there's such a similarity here. Bring up the volume. Bring up the volume. Bring it up. It's the same stuff. It's the same stuff. It's the same reggae-inspired guitar riff with the drums. Now, what's interesting about the Police is that they actually got their music from, or a lot of inspiration, of course, from reggae music in Jamaica. So this sort of cyclical behavior is fascinating to me. And as I said, Bruno Mars is really quite good at it. He's really quite good at this kind of behavior. You know this song. We've all heard this song, right? Now, when I heard this song, the first thing I thought of was Collage Group. Was it the first thing I thought of? I thought of Prince. I thought of the time. It was the same vibe. Or I even thought of Zapp and Roger. And if you listen to the guitars and listen to the way this music is made, it's actually very, very similar to the music that Bruno Mars makes. So in culture, we tend to appreciate these ideas and these artists, but the question is, are they new? Are they really new? Or are they just hitting the cultural appetite at the perfect time? Which also requires some genius, which also is prolific. So that's the past. So looking back, raiding grandma's closet, let's say. There's also the present. And the way I think about Optimus Time in the present is to look beyond, to stretch ourselves beyond the world in front of us. Airbnb is based purely on this idea. I don't know if you know the story of how Airbnb was created, but post-recession, people needed to find incremental and new ways to make some money. So they started renting out their homes. And Airbnb saw that. The target audience wasn't so much the traveler, the target audience was the local resident. And that was a completely new idea for hospitality. Completely new idea is to not reach the person that's traveling, but to reach the person that's already at the destination. And so that's a good example of looking out beyond where you are. Fashion does this like crazy. Balenciaga has this bag, which is really just an IKEA bag. It's really looking beyond what you're used to every day and doing something truly, truly different. Or Old Spice, with this campaign, was really interesting because they basically targeted the partners of dudes, the consumers of their product. They partnered women, in particular, with this kind of sex-driven messaging. Anyone know who this is? This is Brent Corrigan. He is a gay porn star. 82% of women say they prefer gay over straight porn. 37% of Pornhub's gay male porn views are women. And the point being there, let me go back. The point being there, that when you think differently about who the audience is, and you think differently about who can consume your product or your experience, you then can find and explore a new moment in time, a new idea that can really be relevant. So thinking about the future, if the past is about looking back, and the present is about looking out, the future is about looking forward. Google Glass should have been amazing. We should all be wearing Google Glass right now because it was an amazing concept, this idea of wearable interface on your face. But consumers weren't ready for it. There's no real behavior to want that on your face. We need to go through so much more before we're ready to have that sort of experience. And that's the point. The point is about incremental steps, not to reach for the moon, but to do baby steps to get users and consumers used to these really foreign ideas, because it won't happen overnight. You think about what makes this car amazing, what makes a Tesla truly amazing beyond the environmental nature of it. It's that it can grow within itself, and every day it becomes something new. The idea that it became an auto-driving car overnight for users is amazing. You didn't have to buy an auto-driving car. Your car kind of became autonomous on its own. And that's really the point about casual and natural evolution from step to step. You know, Spotify, again on Spotify, they noticed this playlist behavior a couple of years ago. This idea that people love playlists. It was the mixtape all over again, and they took on all these great playlists and branded them and brought them to life. They've always wanted to be a super social music platform, but knowing that you couldn't do that overnight, they had to take baby steps to get people to accept more of this social playlist behavior. So what started this way evolved a little bit. It required some messaging to educate people on playlists and how they're so fascinating and how you should explore them. And then they create new product ideas that evolve that and become more social. This is something they just launched 2 weeks ago, which is a way to share playlists with friends through codes. So the point again is step by step by step. So when I think about Optimus Time, and I think about exploring new ideas for our clients. We look back. We look at the past. We raid grandma's closet. What is there in the past that can come back to life, that can be more relevant today, or have a new sort of visceral benefit for people? We think about the present. What's beyond what we do every day? Is there a target audience, or is there a natural behavior that's very different? How can we mix oil and water? And when it comes to future, it's really looking forward. It's mind the gap. We're all trying to achieve the future, but it's the future. Let's let the future come. Let's let time go by. So that's what we do here, and that's a little bit on Optimus Time. Thanks.